Thank you very much for having me and for the honor to be able to speak here. And my talk is under a little bit different title. Yeah, I've changed the title, but too late to change it in the program. So from the content, it is not so different. To take back control, the democratic catastrophe of the national state in the post-democratically shaped society of Europe. This is in great, I have started with one observation that today, at least, there was a great accordance, a great consensus in all these talks. And unfortunately, I have also to contribute only to this consensus. Europe is not a national, but a transnational constitutional state, if we take the word state not in the narrow sense of national state. At least since Maastricht and Amsterdam, the treaties are the substantial constitution of the Union, to which, in the case of opposition, even national constitutional law must give way, as we have heard just before. The Lisbon Treaty allows exit from the EU only, and the Lisbon Treaty in this respect, the exit is interesting, allows exit only from the EU only according to its conditions. In the 2 years process strictly prescribed in the treaty, the state wishing to exit is a petitioner and the EU is a master of the process. This asymmetrical process, like all EU law, is no longer governed by intergovernmental international law, but by a new kind of transnational union law, or as Andrew Moravcsik put it yesterday, Britain does not want to change 90% of EU treaty commitments and cannot change the other 90%. Unlike United Nations law, which in event of conflict derogates international agreements between states, Article 103 UN, and state legislation only in extreme cases such as wars of aggression or mass cruelty, Article 39 UN, transnational union law changes every day. Our national law penetrates it into its most remote provincial corners and often contributes as much, if not more, to the silent but permanent and continual process of constitutional change. Then, it contributes much more to the silent but permanent, and or as much to the silent and but permanent and continual process of constitutional change than its amendment or silent change, Verfassungswandel, by ordinary legislation. In the past decades, ordinary national legislation. In the past decades, European primary and secondary law, together with the constitutional changes formally agreed between states, debt breaks, and so on, have not just superficially, but massively and fundamentally changed the national formation of democratic self-determination of the rights included in it. And this is also one result of this conference, as I see now. Now, first to the good side of the Union and then to the bad side. Union law, therefore, extends the scope of national rights to the totality of EU citizens who travel through a member state and, however, above all, those who work and live in the state, and thereby enabled the author of this contribution years ago in Aberystwyth, Wales, to benefit from the still free socialist healthcare system of the UK, getting a very expensive medicine just for free, yeah, or a socialist system in Britain, so through the anti-discrimination norms. The only thing I needed was a passport, the European passport. All EU citizens have this right for free movement. EU law changes national rights on the spot. Even the democratic right to vote must be shared in the case of the franchise for the European Parliament by Germans and French with their fellow Europeans from Portugal and Poland who live, whose lives are centered in Germany or France and vice versa. These two of many examples of social and political rights are enough to prove that European constitutional law has an emancipatory dimension which enables a progressive development and realization of the democratic principle embodied in the political self-determination and self-legislation of all those who are individually affected by, even subjected to, legal norms of the European Union. People from Europe, people from other EU states resident in Germany who fell into the clutches of German law but were not citizens already enjoyed above and beyond their universally valid human rights, equal individual rights under the German Constitution, and already under the Weimar Constitution it was so, but were excluded from the political rights of self-determination and their social facilitation. Now they are largely included, and so far the Union has already done the first steps on the road to its declared constitutional goal, that it is the same as that of the German Basic Law to build a democratic and social union. So this is at least a goal of the European Union. All this means that in the case of an exit following EU law, the withdrawal of a member state not only has to take place according to European constitutional law, but must necessarily infringe fundamental national rights of those inhabiting the territory. This infringement of basic rights by the Brexit affects not only the British rights of Polish workers or the European rights of British investment managers, but it is an infringement of the rights of all citizens of the United Kingdom and moreover of the whole EU, because infringing one right of a citizen is infringing all rights of all citizens, infringing the right of all citizens. It can, at least should, therefore only be remedied by the relevant constitutional legislative body, a legal body that represents all affected or subjected by the law of the country by means of a constitutional change. If I, as a German citizen, lose my European rights in Britain, once they withdraw from the Union, I should be asked in a democratic legal state in this or that way. Yeah? So this is a question of lawyers if I have been asked in a legal sense. The ruling Conservative Party in the United Kingdom not only misunderstood how far the kingdom was already integrated in the EU, it also disregarded the consequential changes to its own constitution and passed an unconstitutional referendum law which enabled 37% of those entitled to vote to alter its own constitution in the core domain of its citizens' rights. When the Supreme Court effectively charged it with high treason and declared the referendum null and void, the leaders of government and parliament were not hanged, but required to make the decision to secede dependent on an ultimate act of the legislature. That in the kingdom merely that is in the kingdom merely the people acting as parliament. The ruling party, which, like the North American Republicans, the ruling party in Britain, which, like the North American Republicans, more and more resembles a Kantian people of devils, that is, a people held together only by the possessive individualism of its leadership cliques, initially fell into confusion and then scrambled itself together for fear of its own collapse into a divided government in which every member concealed a dagger. So, as not to be overrun and defeated by its own people and driven out of Westminster, Parliament took upon the consequences of its self-inflicted impotence, its selbstverschuldete Unmündigkeit, giving in against its better judgment to a popular decision degraded to the status of a popular advice or popular desire, and giving the act of withdrawal the legal force of a constitutional change. It sanctified the constitutional violation by a fake referendum with a fake act of parliament, turning the still really existing democracy back into fake democracy. The mere act of Brexit was a regressive dismantling of emancipatory achievements and a massive restriction of political self-determination. It is a great achievement to extend freedom. Yeah, democratic freedom means growth and extension. That is a Deweyan concept of democratic freedom, and I think that should have also a legal meaning. The damage to democracy and democratic rights was exacerbated by the undemocratic and undiscussed implementation of an irremediably fake referendum, compared with which the French referendum on the Constitutional Treaty 2005 was an exemplary case of deliberative democracy. Yeah, now I come to the other side of this process. But this is not yet the whole story of the thoroughly European Brexit. Even so, there should never have been the sort of Brexit which we have experienced. The Brexiteers' slogan, "to take back control," contains an element of truth. That Dieter Grimm mentioned half an hour ago, that the people are confronted, he said, with a degree of integration they have not been asked about. Yeah? Also, the anti-democratic, and it's also the other way around. I also was not asked about my British rights, yeah? So to say. Also, the anti-democratic Leave camp misused it to create a fascist pogrom mood directed at foreigners, citizens termed foreigners, and opponents of withdrawal condemned as foreigners, which in the end did not shrink from murder. But there has been a far-reaching loss of democratic control over society, which cannot wholly be attributed to functional imperatives and self-preservation and uncontrollable complexity, mentioned many times in this conference, and maybe a little bit too many times. The great neoliberal transformation of world society, of a democratic welfare society into a post-democratic and post-solidaristic society is not due to systemic imperatives of self-preservation and complexity alone, but was carried out according to a plan implemented by the Thatcher government in close combined with the America's GOP, the Grand Old Party, which were the earliest to begin this transformation after the first bloody experiments in Chile and Argentina. The basic idea of the Thatcher government came from Hayek, August Friedrich von Hayek, and it consisted in the political program of embedding the state in the supposedly spontaneous order of the market, like a service team in the German original, it is Erwartungstrupp in a factory, turning Polanyi in a crypto-Marxist way from his head back to his feet. The spontaneous integrating the the state, embedding the state, he says, yeah, embedding the state in the spontaneous order of the market. And the result was a further great transformation of society, put by Fritz Scharpf into one sentence, the transformation of state-embedded markets into a society of market-embedded states, and saying that you see immediately the catastrophe. All this, however, required the concerted action of many states, the consolidation of their relations in international organizations, and something important which is often overlooked, the formation of strong elements of transnational statehood. Statehood means that the state functions are not supplemented, but replaced by international organizations. Yeah? Like constitution, abolishing some parts of constitutions by the European Court. Yeah? This is a replacement of state functions, and not only a supplement of classical cases, the right to war, but also health control, curricular formation, everything now, yeah, is a lot of things are replaced completely or partly by international organizations. So it needed the formation of strong elements of transnational statehood on regional and global levels. This process could be described as a construction of a kind of global liberal state by means of which the already well-developed global constitutional and public law was subordinated to capital-friendly private law. Legal formalism was replaced by legal dynamism, Koskiniemi, and legally bound formal rule by legally unbound informal rule. Paradigmatic for the law of the liberal global state is the law of the Euro group. The European Union's constitutional law is tightly bound, and not only the law of the Eurogroup, because the European Union's constitutional laws, as we have heard before, is tightly bound into this system of the globalization of capitalist markets driven by financial capital. More macroeconomic decisions are determined in advance by the treaties. Price stability trumps full employment, labor market access trumps democratic class struggle, financial conditionality trumps solidarity, austerity trumps Keynesian solution, market imperatives trump democratic decisions, and competitiveness trumps everything. This is a European constitutional law. This is European constitutional law, and or constitutionalization of Europe, and yeah, that means it is constitutional law, not the constitution, but constitutional law. This is European constitutional law, and the very reason why the Constitutional Treaty of 2004 was so long, and the treaties are so long, rightly called over-constitutionalization. As Klaus Offe already wrote 15 years ago, competition law is the hidden curriculum of the Union. The establishment of a depoliticized and denationalized currency, another idea going back to Hayek, left 90 states without a central bank and a central bank without a state, and completely removed financial politics from democratic supervision, because, as Massimo said, the EU is a state without a state. Yeah. So this is a paradigm case, a central bank without a state and states without a central bank. The European Union fits seamlessly to the dramatic global increase of social inequality. The Union is one of its driving forces, in particular because governmental and legislative powers were replaced by a system of unchangeable equal rules applied on the increasingly uneven playing field, latest since the euro was implemented. And this is this figure. This figure is interesting because it stems from a fan club of an what is it called? Primary League or first Bundesliga in Britain, yeah, and a sociologist and football player has written an article to it and described it as a paradigm case of neoliberalism. One number from this article, in 1985, that Division I players earned 2.7 times more than average fans. In the Premier League, 2015, 30 years later, they earned 61.5 times more than an average fan, and Manchester United players earn 209 times more than an average fan. And they pay a price for that. Commodification, a colonization of also the life world of the players. 70% of them, of these players, declare bankrupt after 4 years after their career. Drunken, full with alcohol, and played everything out in casinos, yeah. So, and drugs and so on. Yeah. The most disastrous effect was political inequality, the most disastrous effect of this development. It is not only due to the European Union, not at all. It is due to the entire process of neoliberal globalization. But the European Union plays its part, and an important part. Together with the dramatically increasing social inequality of the last 30 years, the turnout of the lowest quarter of income and asset shrinks successively from election to election down to 30% and less, whereas the highest quarter's turnout increases to over 90%, and at the same time, the inexorable drift of leftist parties capable of achieving majority to the right begins. From election to the election, they go one step after the other further right, and now they compete with the AfD in Germany. Now it comes to the final stage in the German government of Schulz and Scholz. Political inequality in Europe is due not only to the national inequality, but it is not due only to the national inequality between northern and southern states, but at the same time to the transnational inequality between social classes and old and young generations. And therefore, I think one should not give up too early the idea of a transnationalization of unions and the other smaller hope in social movements of the 99% against, of the precariat, yeah, of more or less 99% against 1%. And the young people and the unemployed in the South are a potential of this, the strong potential of that kind of movement. Which, by the way, once they become a power, they come always overnight and unpredictable. The result for democracy of this process of economization of the society, the result of democracy on both levels, the European and the national level, is a democracy without opposition, campaigns with no choice between left and right macroeconomic alternatives, Fritz Scharpf, political decisions making that bypasses political decision-making that bypasses public opinion and ever more frequently public law, Christoph Möllers. As Chris Blickerton yesterday put it, we have reached a public sphere of post-representative, factually non-majoritarian constitutional legal rule, and on the other side, a passive audience of an Hegelian, depoliticized bürgerliche Gesellschaft, a bourgeois society, the realization of the Hegelian state. It is a legal state, but it is not a democracy. All this is due not only but to a considerable amount to the fact that, I quote Blickerton, the EU provides the perfect institutional context for depoliticized politics. And I could quote a lot of other people here, your papers and Sharp's papers and so on, with nearly the same written. Or Habermas also, yeah. Therefore, the people from lower strata and from the periphery of society who do not vote are not just apathic, but have good reasons not to do so. Why shall they vote if they are no longer represented in the spectre of political parties? Their behavior is rational, also because it reminds us that there is no democracy if democracy is nothing else than free elections and a list of rights and courts to care for their fair implementation plus free markets. To be democratic, democracy must be much more than majority rule plus minority rights. It must represent all of us who are subject to legal norms. This is Rousseau's volonté générale. Yeah, I have one more page. Is this okay? Yeah. To be democratic, democracy must be much more than majority rule plus minority rights. It must represent all of us who are subject to legal norms. And that means that all of us, at least all groups and classes of society vertically, from social top to bottom, and horizontally from center to periphery, must participate and must have reasons. That is more important than actual participation. They must have reasons to participate in, first, inclusive and egalitarian public debates and deliberations, and second, in general elections and other votes, as in the wording of Article 22 German Basic Law. Therefore, there is no democracy beyond deliberative and participatory self-legislation. Participatory inequality of irrelevant numbers of vertically excluded, precarious and exploited social classes, as well as of horizontally discriminated, oppressed and persecuted social groups like women, colored people, religious communities, and so on, together with regional inequalities between national states of a union of states, kills modern democracy. What's to be done to get back democratic control is due to all affected and all subjected to legal norms in Europe. This is easy to list, but I have no idea how to carry it out. The list is, first, massive redistribution from the upper to the lower strata of society, which, if it works, nobody knows that, would reduce injustice substantially and bring growth back. At the same time, second, a combination of a decent basic income with massive public investment and massive investment in education. That is the only point that is in accordance with the Social Democratic program. Not the basic income, but the education thing and for the digital industry. Moreover, third, because we all share the negative premise of a good life in modern societies, that nobody really wants to live without the 5 great inventions of electricity, running water, pharmaceuticals, mass communication, and mass transportation, and without expanding science, education, medicine, and so on. John Dewey was right. There is no democratic solidarity without growth. Therefore, the only hope for growth that is less disastrous than capitalist and socialist growth as we know it is green growth. However, because of the enormous blackmailing power of global capitalism a democratic solution of these problems is impossible from the outset without, 5, a transnational reconstruction of democracy that moves real power to transnational levels in Europe and beyond. Together with 6, deliberative egalitarianism. There exists a huge number of proposals for local, national, and transnational deliberative democracy in social science, which are all well thought through. One can even organize deliberative referenda, as Klaus Offe has come to the end, has shown in a recent paper on Brexit, but there is no way to realize them without a considerable socialization of the now totally privatized global media industry. This is the most important point because there will be no change without a, of course, risky repoliticization of the dried-up public sphere. That last was a quote of Habermas from 1968. All that is extremely unlikely, my last sentence, but it is not impossible, and it is much less impossible to win majorities for political programs that come close to many of these 7 crucial points. Once political parties or movements pose substantial alternative to the now globalized regime of declared and undeclared great coalitions of authoritarian liberalism, political programs far left from the middle and or transnationally oriented programs have a considerable good chance to win in societies where the majority belongs to the precariat but is well educated and more than less liberal and anti- and post-authoritarian as ever, as not only social research, but also recent elections in Britain, France, Southern Europe, and the United States clearly show. Sorry for being too long.